Hey everyone, I do want to go ahead and get started. I know you guys all have very busy days. First of all, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time to get to know us a little bit and learn so much about cybercrime and mitigation of your threats. So anyway, I will pass it on over now to our CTO/President, Jeremy Conway, and he'll take it away. And also, one more thing, just so you know, make sure that you mute yourselves at the bottom left corner. We are using a format that allows you to interject, but we ask that you chat your questions in as well, and then we'll get to them at the end. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jen. Let's see if I can get control of this. All right, so as Jen said, my name is Jeremy Conway. I'm also CTO and President of MAD Security, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about cybercrime and threat mitigation. My background is about 22 plus years, maybe a little longer than that. I'm showing my age here, in information technology and cybersecurity. I actually founded MAD Security's managed security services and threat mitigation team. I've got a long, extensive history in cybersecurity that goes all the way back to doing red team testing and assessments, to doing things also for vendors and commercial products such as the Nitro Security SIM, which was acquired by McAfee later on. And I've even have time and experience all the way back into the government and such, like NASA Security Operations Center that is down here in Huntsville, Alabama at the Marshall Space Flight Center. I actually originally started doing cybersecurity as an active duty soldier and then transitioned over into as a contractor. So you basically say my entire career has been in some sort of cybersecurity or information security like program. My education includes a master's degree in information security, a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics, and I maintain right at about 23, 24 industry certs at any given time. So I've been around for a little while. So what are we talking about today? Cybersecurity criminals, they generate billions of dollars of profit by constantly developing new attacks, and we see those attacks change all the time. And since most of cybercrime is about money and increasing the attacker's ability to successfully gain that money, you have to automatically assume that where there is money, there will be cybercrime, and where is that money hosted? Most of the time, it's in places where a large threat landscape or a large attack surface for that is financial institutes, right? Specifically banks, and we're seeing a tremendous surge in these types of attacks across the globe and in many different countries, but especially here in the U.S. as well. So banks are rich targets for cyber criminals because that's where money's at and transactions occur there. There are all types of other types of cyber crimes and stuff out there, but specifically there's a huge surge in follow the money and banks storing that. So that's what we're going to specifically talk about today. The main attack vectors that we've seen in the last 18, 24 months have been in mobile malware, in fake banking applications in the mobile devices, web skimming, cryptojacking, password spraying, and extortion. And these are the ones that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to go over each one of these individually. There are many, many other attack vectors out there, but these are the ones that we've seen the largest surge in. So we'll start with mobile malware. So mobile malware, what that is it's basically a malicious application or malicious program that gets loaded onto the mobile device. And the type of mobile malware that is most common for use in attacks, especially cyber criminals, is Trojans. And they weaponize these to gain access or capabilities on the device, and we call that mobile malware. There's 4 major areas of development that we see in these Trojans. There are what we call droppers, which are designed to bypass the detection mechanisms. There are attacks on bank accounts via these mobile devices. So, and we also see adware apps being used in these Trojans, and we see apps that can be used by cybercriminals to cause damage, physical damage, or damage to the infrastructure. We'll talk about each one of these. So the first one is Trojan Droppers. They are Matryoshka-like programs. They're easily created and simple programs. If you ever seen the Russian doll where you take off the head and the body and there's another one that looks like it just inside of it and you can't really tell what's inside of it or what's at the very, very root of it, that was what a Trojan Dropper is. Its whole goal is to counteract detection, and it's very polymorphic. It enables any number of unique files to be created or executed. Its only goal is to be small, lightweight, easily modified and very dynamic so that it can then load the actual payload or malware Trojan that the attacker would use later on. So it's there to bypass security, get around sandboxes and protections and like that. And these things are just widely available and sold everywhere for all kinds of purposes. Next type of mobile malware we see out there is attacking the actual banking applications themselves. The main objective of this type of mobile malware is to create a transaction between the bank and the victim's device. It's the fastest growing threat in mobile applications, with various statistics saying it basically doubled in 2018. Right about mid-2018, we saw on the dark web and on the black market a bunch of these basically attack-like packages or malware-like packages for mobile banking specifically that were available for sale. And since that occurred, it kind of like blew out the market, and you're seeing a wide variety of local banking applications and Trojans being just sold and reused over and over and over. So that kind of like basically doubled it right around in 2018. Typically, the lure is usually over an SMS message or a social media phishing effort. SMS interception is a real common feature of that. And why they do the SMS interception is a lot of folks are using two-factor authentications and sending those message codes on there. So the capabilities in this type of application will also have the ability to receive those so that they can then inject that code and the attacker can move forward with his attack to defeat two-factor authentication. Interesting enough, just in the last like 9, maybe 12 months, we've seen an implementation of what we call DNS hijacking. That wasn't super common in mobile banking applications or mobile malware. You see that very commonly in regular applications and Trojans and stuff on computers and PCs and laptops and things like that in a regular network environment. What that does is the computer or device itself, when you're trying to go to a website or an application, or the application is trying to reference the API for the banking application, it's going to use a domain name, and that domain name is going to get looked up to a DNS server. And what happens is this application is able to hook itself in and provide answers back for any queries for that. So if a individual piece of application can embed itself, especially in the accessibility services, it's able to answer any query on that mobile device for something. So let's say that you wanted to go to goodbank.com and you punch that in, or let's say one of your applications, such as a budgeting application or a financial balancing sheet application, or maybe just an investment application, was looking for goodbank.com. When that was queried, what would happen is, using DNS hijacking, that application has hooked itself in the device. It would answer back with a malicious or the attacker's IP address, thereby sending you to that server and interjecting themselves to create transactions. So it's kind of a scary thing. And now that they're able to get into the accessibility services, it presents its whole new issue for mobile devices. As when it gets into the accessibility services, it lodges the malware into core system files and allows overlaying of things like phishing windows on top of your banking apps. It's extremely hard to get rid of. It's not as easy as just like, hey, I'm going to uninstall this application and it's going to go away. I don't have this problem. It can legitimately, based off security permissions and stuff, inject itself or overlay itself in the other applications to carry out the attack. It also allows for things like sandbox detection. So let's say that you've deployed a MDM solution that has a sandbox in it. It will be able to detect that and either disable it or move itself to an unsecured container to carry out the attack anyway. And it can render static and dynamic analysis powerless, right? So as you're prowling the device and stuff, because it's in the accessibility services, it can give back answers that basically make it incognito to those detection mechanisms. Very, very hard to detect. All right, so mobile malware, and especially in adware apps. Advertising is relatively a safe method of enrichment for cyber criminals. You have to understand that there's so many advertisers and that business is so big that it's really, really hard for advertisers to figure out who's legit, who's not legit. The people that get harmed mostly in that are the advertisers themselves, because they have, they pay per click. And it's widely seen, especially in mobile applications, because of the freeness of these applications, and users use it, say, for a bank register app, or like a check register app where they're balancing their checkbooks, or they're interacting, doing things like free credit checks and things like that. You'll find that most of these applications, how they pay for themselves and how they make money is they allow advertisements to occur in there. So users are very, very accustomed to seeing these, which makes this attack avenue extremely rich for them, in that it's not odd to get a pop-up or something like that. And if you brand it just right and you're attacking the right application, you can make it look like it's basically within the application and it's something the user needs to click on. So malware in the mobile devices use a lot of adware apps and such. It's got a huge, large user base for phishing attacks, and it really enriches the SMS phishing attacks. So when they can combine a Trojan and an adware application inside of that, they can make it look like they're communicating with one another, sending SMS messages, make it more legitimate and a more enriched attack to fool the user into going further. All right, so how does a malware attack happen, right? Here's an example. So basically what happened is an attacker will basically send an SMS message or a social media post or an email. The user goes to it on his mobile devices, clicks on the Trojan, and the Trojan Dropper basically is installed. That's a small, like Russian doll-like application that all he's going to do is grab that executable, which will bypass all the security protections, and then install the actual payload Trojan. And that one's not static. That's the one that once we've disabled the antivirus and Sandbox Detection, all that stuff, that's the one that's going to carry out everything. So from there, it'll establish communication with the attacker. And then when the user logs into their banking app or other application, the attacker alters the banking app to trick the user to call the attacker. So maybe a pop-up that says, hey, there's an error connected to the bank, or hey, there's this, and please give us a call. So the attacker actually receives a call from the user. Attacker gathers information needed for a wire transfer and says, okay, well, I need your bank information. I need this to validate, and gets that type of information from them. And then the attacker uses that to transfer money or disables user's bank account. A lot of folks believe that these attacks occur very automated, and they do. You can do transactions. If you can hijack the application itself or overlay itself, you can get the user to carry this out. But this is actually one of the more common techniques where they actually get the attacker or get the user who's being, or the victim, to actually call the attacker, and the attacker just talk them through it and to gain that information. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the fake mobile banking apps that are out there. So how does that attack work? Basically like this: trick the victim into installing malware by posing as a legitimate banking app, obtain the needed permissions to install. You get the little pop-up and you say, yep, I need to install, and it's got these permissions. Upon launch, display a phishing screen mimicking a legitimate banking app, such as maybe one of your financial institutes. Then request credentials, account info, credit card info, etc. Walk through that. Harvest these collected information, display an error and say thank you message, and optionally also use an SMS permission to intercept one-time password. So if that is occurring, you'll get the SMS to make it legit. It carries out the fraudulent transaction using the victim information and sell that information on the black market. So that's how a basic fake mobile banking app would happen. Here's the thing about fake mobile apps. About 1 in 3 people, based off of multiple surveys and our red teaming and our assessments on financial institutes and customer bases and other folks, it's probably about 30% of people will get fooled by a fake banking app. But the problem is this: is that we always think that that's the only attack surface, and we do a lot of financial institutes, and they don't think about the applications that truly interact with that banking infrastructure, the API, right? So there's a lot of budgeting apps out there. There's a lot of credit monitoring apps. There's refinance apps. There's loan processing applications. There's all these other applications that use the mobile banking's API and this published API or the bank's API to do these things, such as log into the user's account and pull certain information out so they can budget or check credit and use balances and do things like that. So that's very public out there. Those apps have a greater success of impersonating. Why? Because there's so many of them that it's really hard to distinct which ones are legit and which ones aren't legit from users. But they can be written to be very, very sexy or enticing for the user because it'll offer features like, hey, help you do investment advice or help you do your budgeting or free credit checking, and oh, we'll find the lowest loan credit cards for you, and they'll interact with that and they'll put all their information in there and then interact with your financial institute's API to carry out these transactions. So most attackers today aren't traditionally going after, let's say, your financial institute's bank app and mirroring that and then putting it in the Play Store and hoping that somebody downloads it. They're mirroring other apps like, say, Credit Karma or QuickBooks or things like that, these one-off free-like apps that they can do, and then they plug into your API to carry out these transactions. And they're usually distributed through official app stores such as Google Play or Apple, but there's also the unofficial app stores, which are pirated app stores. These are very, very dangerous and less common, especially for the standard user bases, because the device has to be rooted and it has to be loaded. There's a little more technical capabilities to doing that. But it's not impossible, and we do see it. So fake mobile banking apps have a short lifespan. And the reason they have a short lifespan and why folks tend to use the impersonating of other banking apps that are banking enrichment apps, right, or enhancement apps, is because as soon as you fake the bank app, the user's likely going to know that something went wrong. There's an error, right? Not the case with the enhancement app. That's kind of why that attack surface is better. All right, let's talk a little bit about web skimming. So web skimming, it's almost just like ATM skimming, and most financial institutes are very, very aware of what ATM skimming is. That's what the little thing is installed on the gas pump or the ATM machine. The card slides through it, and they get the codes and read off of that, and then it's passed over via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to the attacker, or the attacker comes and takes the device and processes the data off later. Well, that's the exact same thing web skimming is, except for it's skimming the form where the credit card is processed itself. A lot of times we see that as like weaponizing cross-site scripting. So the attacker is able to inject something into the form that allows, when that's being processed, for them to push that credit card information over, right? And it can target the merchant or the third-party payment processing service itself. So it's not only just the web application form or application, but if they can actually get a hold of the merchant or the third-party payment processing service, they could basically target everybody that uses that service. It's extremely easy to stop once it's identified. The problem is it's very, very hard to detect. It typically goes on for months without detection. These types of vulnerabilities, just like most folks that have ever received a vulnerability assessment or a penetration test on their web application, know that cross-site scripting or code injection attacks are extremely common in these, even in the APIs and stuff, which is very hard to detect because a lot of the times that's just being executed on the user's interface and manipulating your form or your web API in a standard way, but getting additional data scraped off of that. It can be even worse if the attack isn't attacking the actual merchant itself, but is attacking the third-party payment processing. So if the attacker is able to compromise, say, a back-end service which has these forms and everybody's using these forms, they can attack multiple financial institutes at one time or multiple merchants at one time versus the merchant itself. And just note that HTTPS encryption doesn't actually prevent this type of attack because that only secures the connection between the end user and the server itself. If this is embedded in the code, it will easily just transition right over that encryption in HTTPS, just like if it was regular text. So this doesn't, so having the little lock or having encryption on your website doesn't prevent somebody from performing web skimming. All right, how does this happen? Attacker identifies vulnerability in a payment processing form. Attacker injects some malicious JavaScript code into that form. Victims perform a payment processing as normal. Attacker receives this payment information. Attacker uses information to make fraudulent purchase or sells the information on the black market. It's a fairly simple attack. All right, let's talk a little bit about cryptojacking. And you may be wondering, like, okay, so cryptojacking, how does that actually hurt me as a financial institute or a bank? The reality is that cryptojacking is using the device in an unauthorized fashion to do some mathematical computations to do what they call mine cryptocurrency. And when somebody mines cryptocurrency, they're rewarded for using their CPU cycles or those resources and get paid that way. So the incentives are paid as a reward for performing this mining action by issuing that cryptocurrency that they're mining for. It uses the same methodology as, say, ransomware, but the victims don't need to know they've been attacked for criminals to profit. So what happens here is that financial institutes, because you have so much processing power and such there, it is not uncommon for an attacker to compromise your resources and use it to do mining and go undetected for a long period of time and gain money that way. So they're not actually taking or stealing money from you, but because they can make money by using your resources, we end up finding it in not only the financial institute, but across the industry itself. But recently, we've been finding it in financial institutes and stuff that we've been looking at. So there's two main primary methods to get infected this way. Usually, it's either a phishing-like attack or a code injection on one of the websites or ad servers themselves. And like I said, it's parasitic in nature. It's leveraging your CPU and network resources in an industry, and financial institutes and banking operate in fractions of a second. So think about if you couldn't conduct a trade or you couldn't conduct a transaction or ACH payment or something there's penalties for you not being able to do that. You could lose the account. You could miss certain interest, right? You could end up missing a short or a long and a hold or something in transactions that you're occurring with in fractions of a second. So any delay, because they're leveraging your CPU and your network resources, and they're trying to go undetected, but they're trying to use as much as they can to gain profit. Any kind of delay like that could impact you financially as well. So you need to be very, very aware of this type of attack and how it affects you. All right. Password sprays. This is an attack on credentials, and it's just gotten a little new techniques to it. The techniques have become very, very much more effective, but it's the exact same of attack, right? So the traditional one looks like this. Attacker researches your organization, identifies valid user accounts. It's not really hard to figure out what the user account form is. Emails, things like that can easily give the attacker the right footprint, right, or the right pattern for that username. So then from there, they use these common passwords like Spring 2019, password 123. I'm in Huntsville, Alabama right now, so Roll Tide will be in there, or War Eagle, those types of things. And they'll use those, and they'll basically take that and spray it to known login accounts using those accounts. And they won't do it more than, say, 3 to 5 times every 10 minutes or so that they don't ever lock out any accounts, because we know that would lock them out. Now, once one of these have been successful, and it's very likely that somebody's using a password like this, what they do is they use that to log in, and then they download your GAL or your global access list, and then perform that same exact password attack on all the user accounts. And using those compromised credentials, they attack, then expands laterally to carry out whatever objective they have in there. And that's fairly effective, and that's how it's been working for years and years. What's new, though, is now attackers have gotten a little smarter. Attackers research the target organization to find the user accounts, just like before. Attacker searches user accounts against public available password dumps online from major breaches, right? So instead of just making up common passwords, they're looking at major breaches that you can find out there that are stored on, or you can be purchased, or they're stored on public sites. You see them everywhere. And they use these passwords, compromising these breaches, and then they spray those known passwords associated with those attacks. And they may even use an algorithm to add like an exclamation mark at the end, change some letters, functions, things like that. And they're more targeting the individual end users now with known passwords and targeting password reuse, and it results in a much higher success rate. And then the attacker continues as previously, where they grab your GAL, do it over for everybody, and move on. So the difference in the old technique, new technique is, the old technique, they used common passwords. In the new technique, they're using very specific passwords that user has known to have been compromised in, say, another account, like a LinkedIn breach, or the Yahoo breach, or any one of the other breaches that are out there. They've downloaded those and then used those attacks, or used those passwords against them. All right, let's talk a little bit of extortion, because this is probably the one that we've seen recently gain the most momentum and has been very, very prevalent, especially the last 6 to 8 months. Traditional examples of extortion were denial of service. So what is a denial of service act? That's basically some kind of service that you're offering. Let's say it's your website. The attacker will flood that website with requests, or flood the network to that website so that no other legitimate users can get there. That's a traditional example. Another traditional example is ransomware, where the attacker loads malware on the device. It encrypts your hard drives and then puts up a message that says, hey, pay me X amount in Bitcoin, and I'll give you the encryption key, and then you can unencrypt or decrypt, not unencrypt, but decrypt all your data and get it back. And we've seen those. It's been prevalent. Those types of attacks, denial of service has been around for 20 years. Ransomware has been around 5+ years. It's extremely common. But in the new age of data privacy laws, we see a new type of attack. The attacker demands money not expose your sensitive information to that they proclaim to have compromised. So what happens is the attacker itself emails the company or the victim, and they basically say that they were proclaiming to have compromised some type of sensitive data in your environment. The attacker will then usually provide some form of limited proof, such as, hey, I'm going to give you your username and passwords, or account numbers, or credit card numbers, and it'll be a subset of data, and they'll say, hey, here's a sample of the stuff that I pulled off by hacking your network, these things. And they'll say, oh, well, if you do not want me to go public, or if you do not want me to inform your customers, or send out to all your customers that we've compromised your stuff and that you don't care about their security, they'll have some kind of threat in there. Then you must pay us, and it'll request something, payment usually in Bitcoin, and they'll have a defined date, or they'll expose that information to them. And then you, as the victim, have to decide, do I want to chance that they do this by not paying, or do I pay them and hopefully they go away, right? It's the standard extortion attack. But there's a big dilemma to this. is the data actually compromised from you as the victim? So the reality is that username and password dumps from previous compromise are publicly available and easily downloadable everywhere, right? So let's say that somebody used, I don't know, their corporate account to log into a common email, and that email service has gotten hacked. Well, they can look through there and they say, oh, okay, well, this is Joe at goodbank.com. And I'm going to email goodbank.com and say, hey, here's Joe, here's Bob's, here's Jill's, here's Tim's, here's Tom's passwords, and we took them all out of your system. And since we took them all out of your system, we're going to tell all your customers that you don't like security. And they literally never actually hacked your stuff. They just downloaded it, and now they're threatening it to you. Another way that they do this, especially with financial institutions, banks, is they provide account and credit card numbers. It could also be associated with your customers, right? And that could be associated with non-related compromises. It is not unlikely that a single blacklist or black market purchase of a list, an attacker can target a wide range of folks for extortion. So think about this. They go out there on the black market and spend, $1,000 or $100, just depending on how big they want that list. There will be credit card numbers and usernames and stuff associated with that they'll purchase. They can go back and attack those individual banks that have issued that and say that they took it from there. The thing is, the financial institute or the bank that is issuing that or is sponsoring that and houses those accounts, they have to decide, do they believe that actually came from them? Is it credible, or could it have been somewhere from the past? One that a lot of folks have also seen is also considered an attack that's usually on the individual, and it's what we call sextortion. It's a serious crime where someone threatens to disrupt a private or sensitive material for something in return, normally money. It's the newest phishing attack, and I think why I expand on this one so much is because a lot of us have seen these in our individual accounts, but we're seeing them against companies as well. And it's kind of like the extortion, but they're targeting an individual person. So what happens is this. Attacker emails the victim, claiming to have compromised their computer, or performed the following. Downloaded all the contacts for that compromised computer, or the people that they're going after, recorded them on their webcam, recorded their screen while they were visiting a pornographic website. Then the attacker provides proof by sharing their password in the email. So the user that they're attacking, or the victim, they share their password in the email and say, hey, we also did all this other stuff. Then the attacker demands the victim pay via Bitcoin within 5 days or so, or they're going to take that proof, which is a download of all their contacts, recording them on their webcam, going to these pornographic sites and doing all this stuff. So it's kind of embarrassing for somebody, and then they show them the password to kind of see that as if they actually did this, and then the victim has to decide whether or not they pay. So does this phishing attack? So how does that phishing attack really work? And we've seen automated scripts for this and stuff. So this is also how regular extortion works. What happens is they go out and download a password dump, one of the many that are out there. They use a script that basically, dumps that or parses out that password, and then they just send out emails to every one of these people, and then they collect the money. They really never hacked anybody, but because they were able to see that thought or that scare of, oh my God, there's my password, they must have hacked my stuff. A lot of folks just pay this, and we have seen sextortion run through law firms, financial institutes, and folks, and their people are paying, anywhere between $700 to $5,000 a pop to cover these, and they're doing it without knowing that their stuff really isn't compromised. And if you add that up across the organization, we've seen it range up almost into the six figures. They've attacked so many folks in the organization, and they all paid out of their individual stuff. So it's a pretty successful attack, and the user doesn't even actually have to have any true technical ability to compromise your infrastructure. It's all just out of fear. So where do we go from here? Let's talk a little bit about how we prevent this and mitigate this, specifically in the financial sector, right? So one of the biggest mistakes that we see time and time again, and this is in every industry that we service, is attempt to build an individual threat or individual prevention and mitigation strategy for each individual threat. So we see something scary, we buy some technology, and we protect us against something scary. And the next thing that comes out is scary, and we just keep reacting to every single thing. The reality is then we have all these disjointed systems and disjointed devices, and nobody's maintaining them, and we're spending a whole bunch of money, and we're being very reactive. The most effective strategy, though, against this is the one that attempts prevention, but is designed to be defensible. So enter in what everybody likes in the financial institutes is the FFIEC, right? The Federal Financial Institute Examination Council. It includes 5 banking regulators: the FRE, FDIC, NCUA, OCC, CFPB. So if you're a financial institute, one or many of those are regulators that apply stuff to you. The FFIEC stuff is actually based on NIST 853, and if you know what NIST 853 is, that is what the federal government have used. Now, DoD is adopting some of that, but the federal civil government across the board uses that to secure government systems. It's pretty mature and well-known and recognized. Inside the FFIEC, they also have the IT Examination Handbook, which is fairly detailed of all the different things that you need to do. And they have this semi-complicated tool called a CAT tool. And I want to specifically talk about that CAT tool and how it's used here in just a second. And one other thing that this FFIEC has published inside of that IT Examination Handbook and in using the CAT tool is they have an extremely detailed mobile security appendix. And remember, mobile security is a big deal going on right now. We see a huge surge in that. And FFIEC aligns with the Center of Information CIS top 20 controls. So it's very mature. It was developed specifically for finance institutes to identify risk, and it's also to determine the cybersecurity preparedness. And how it does it is 2 parts. Identify the institute's inherent risk using a risk profile, and you guys are probably very aware of this, and then basically determine the maturity level within the 5 major domains of that based off your risk profile. So here's some CAT issues, and that CAT is that assessment tool, right? So it's founded in NIST 853 controls, but it's extremely and can be too rigid, and that you'll find that certain controls don't work in certain applications, or it's not in a black or white area, but it's in a gray area on how you need to control certain data or net flow or network flows or communication flows or information flows, that type of stuff. It's also often seen, the CAT by financial institutes and folks is seen as a paper trail with minimal value. And a lot of that has to do with what the deliverable is, in that it's a maturity level and not a roadmap. When you get done with the CAT, you get this maturity level, and you're like, okay, so what do I do with this? And is this right? And most of the times, it's more worried about how is my auditor, the FIC auditor, people are going to confirm this, and I'm going to put this across, going to interpret how we did the CAT, right? Another problem is interpreting the results can be overwhelming and cause confusion, leading to downplaying of the value of the tool itself. And almost every time we've come in and helped somebody do the FFIEC type audit or try to mature them past that, we found that validation of assumptions typically do not occur. And what we mean by that is this. A lot of times it's a roundtable exercise, and when folks sit around with their IT folks and they say, okay, so do we have this? And they say, yep, and they check the box. And they say, okay, do we have this? They say, yep, they check the box. But nobody's actually validating whether that is actually implemented correctly in the environment, doing technical like testing to see if that actually occurred or those settings are actually there. Now, artifacts can be collected in even a regular control audit, and you'll find a lot of like CPA firms and financial firms, those guys that kind of slide over and try to do FFIEC audits. They'll say, okay, well, give me a screenshot of this or that. But what they're not thinking about is no environment or one set of controls. Let's say that they get a screenshot of your Windows configuration in GPO. That doesn't apply to, let's say, all your network devices, or maybe a Unix Linux system or some other system that may not be tied into and receiving that GPO. So they leave a lot of stuff on the table. Now, finance institutes are even more likely to miss or have gaps in their security posture because of this validation not occurring. And why is that? Well, finance institutes are really, really smart about how they do services. They don't do a lot of stuff internally other than what makes them money or makes them productive. And they have this whole risk mitigation strategy. So they move a lot of stuff to cloud services. Validating cloud services across disjointed amount of APIs and services is extremely hard. So taking a screenshot, say, from your Azure configuration when you have assets sitting in over an AWS or in another hosting like, say, Rackspace or in your data center itself, doesn't actually meet that full control across your entire attack surface or thing. So you could literally be checking the yes box, and you are valid for that one area, but you're missing the other pieces, which would be no. And the only way to actually find that out is have somebody come in that has done a lot of this and kind of validate those things. So the last part that we see a lot of mistakes is in the inherent risk calculations, and that is at the very, very beginning where people start to take in the mitigating controls when they try to figure out what risk profile they are. Bottom line is the CAT tool is not designed to deliver a strategy or roadmap, and that's what a lot of folks want out of it, and it just doesn't happen. here is what you get on a result of that. At the very top of that, you see that you have inherent risk levels. And so what you're doing is, hey, how many different people do I connect to? What types of transactions am I occurring? Who are those folks? And you'll fall somewhere in between the least risk and the most risk. A lot of folks, fall anywhere in there. Just depends on the size, the amount of assets you manage, and also how many different interconnections you have to different types of services and such. And then from there, on the left, you have the maturity levels. And you have baseline, evolving, immediate, advanced, and innovative. And the goal here is to fall somewhere in the green. So as you evaluate the controls that are defined in the baseline, evolving, or over there on the left-hand side, all those domains, you start to plot out on your graph where you are. And you notice that every single risk level, except for the least and the top, have 3 individual green blocks. So if you're in one of those individual green blocks, you're supposedly the optimal for your level. If you're falling outside of it, let's say that you're down here in the minimal, right, minimal risk, and you're down here in evolving, but you have controls met that are way up here. That means that you're spending more money than you need to be at your risk level. Let's say that you're over here in the significant risk, and most of your stuff is over here in advanced, but then you have a couple controls that are down here in baseline or evolving. That means you're underinvesting and you're putting yourself at too much risk. So the goal here on this is to figure out a way to converge into the optimal point. Do I need to be in the middle green block of my inherent risk and domain, or should I be at the top one ready to shift over because my business is about to grow into the next level? And that takes a lot of analysis and a lot of understanding and a lot of work to figure that out. And it's really, really hard, especially in financial institutes where risk management is maintained under one roof and IT security is maintained under another roof and reports to a different set of boards. And then also your IT department and administration folks and their stuff is under another group and under another control board. And they have all these disjointed groups trying to come together and answer these questions. It can be significantly hard for anybody to quarterback or coach this effort to get an accurate result. So, but when done right, that tool can be very successful. You can identify the risk drivers. You can you can determine the optimal enhancements to align, and that's what you want to do. You can make informed risk management strategies. You can measure and monitor your progress, and you can connect strategic with operation functions, right? So your strategic progress of your business with the operational functions with that. That is what the CAT tool should be able to do, but most folks struggle with it. With the right set of guidance, that's what the CAT tool can provide you. All right, so going back to the very beginning, what I'd like to stress here is using something like the FFIC maturity model and CAT tool to evaluate where you are. That's a good way to create to not get distracted by individual threats, right? So you want to implement a prevention or threat mitigation strategy that align with your risk profile. And the CAT tool and FFIC can assist you with that. The goal here is use something that's tried and true, like that, to balance how your security is implemented across your environment versus chasing every last thing. So, we saw ransomware is a problem, so then we go buy a ransomware solution. We saw that extortion is a problem, so then we subscribe to some threat feed that talks about where these people are coming from and then better identifies them and gives them a profile so we can do that. No, there's this new threat that comes out and attacks our firewall, so we buy something that sits in front of there. Doing that will leave you overspending or underspending and leave holes in your security. So, to demonstrate what like a full-fledged life cycle or maturity or mature like infrastructure would be that could fit in any one of those different risk profiles, you need some basic things, and that's kind of what Mass Security has done with their managed services. We start with identifying what is on the network, right? First thing you got to do is look out there and say, hey, what is out there? What's in my infrastructure? Whether that be cloud-based, whether that be infrastructure, whether it be laptops, whether it be printers, whether it be ATM machines, how all that sits, and from those different perspectives. And that's done through both passive and active discovery. Now that we know what everything is out there, and you should be thinking about this as just how you do it in your environment as well. Now we know that everything's out there. What state is that? Think about it like if you had a car lot and you had 100 cars in it, which ones are new, which ones are used, which ones have a bad battery, which ones are unlocked, which ones have broken windows. Same thing with vulnerability assessment. We're looking at the entire infrastructure, IT infrastructure. We're saying, okay, what state are they in? Which ones have been patched? Which ones haven't been patched? Which ones have default logins? Which ones have ports that are open? And what does that look to? So what is their vulnerability state and where do they live? Once we have all that information, next thing we want to do is start looking at, okay, well, there's vulnerabilities, but is anybody actually taking advantage of those vulnerabilities? So we want to look at the threats associated with it. We do that by looking at the network traffic. We look at that by looking at the system logs, host-based intrusion detection, file integrity monitoring, whole bunch of correlation directives, and hundreds and thousands of threat feeds that all feed in there. We're monitoring that on the systems, on the network, on the APIs, on the cloud infrastructure. All that's being brought together. So we know where it's at, we know what state it is, and we're looking to see if anybody's trying to take a capitalization on that using like signature-based kind of stuff and direct detection. We know that that's not good enough, but that's where a lot of folks stop at. You also have to do behavioral monitoring. Okay, we know there's threats out there, but these threats can be embedded in normal looking traffic and stuff. So what we want to do is do behavioral monitoring. We're going to look at the actual net flow analysis. Is something out of the ordinary occurring here? Is some protocol being used more than normal or out of ordinary? Is its size too big? Is it happening too rapidly, right? And you got to do that using behavioral monitoring by baselining and then looking for outliers from that. That's an extremely complex thing to do, but we add that on top of there. And then the next part on that is, and I don't see a lot of folks taking this into consideration, is the human security behavior assessment. All this before here is all about the technology. Now the technology, the biggest problem usually is between the chair and the keyboard, right? So technology, we can fix all that stuff, but you can't always fix the human. So you have to understand what that human's doing in there. A lot of folks do this. They do simulated phishing attacks. Financial institutions do this all the time. They teach them, they try to educate them and stuff, but what's lacking is taking that information and putting it back into your technology infrastructure. And that's what we at Mass Security do. We take that information, find out that Joe, Jill, John, whoever that is vulnerable to these types of attacks. We plug it back into our monitoring and actually apply it back into threat detection, looking for behavior from that user where somebody's trying to capitalize on it. So now not only just systems being monitored, but it's users. So just doing the phishing assessment, just subscribing and getting your user to learn about it, that's great. It's going to raise your level. But being able to, detect that occurring in real time is priceless. Putting that back in and making that a variable into your entire service is extremely beneficial. If you know that Jill just has a bad habit of clicking on things and not reporting it, then you see suspicious behavior happening on a computer, or you see signatures flying back out saying that that is being exfiltrated or anomalous like traffic is occurring. That user's then a little more susceptible, and we should be reporting that or looking into that a little further. It's almost like doing the vulnerability assessment on the technology, but doing it on the human, taking that information and putting it back in there so that we can overlay additional threat detection on it. And then last but not least is that you have all this stuff going on. It's like extremely hard to see happening, and you have all this disjointed stuff. You have to bring it all together in like a SIM or log management, some kind of incident response, threat intelligence kind of, which we call security intelligence. So if you have an infrastructure and you're managing, I would say, hey, model it after what we've done here in our managed services. And if you're looking to outsource that and you're looking at different managed services, make sure they do all these things, because it gives you a pragmatic solution to a problem versus being reactive, right? If you're measuring, oh, well, the latest attack is this, can you do that? Most likely, because there's a full, enriched set of ways to detect that stuff, but it may not be the newest, shiniest, sexiest way of doing it. Reality is you need a very mature and pragmatic solution versus a very spotty, individual type solution for every single thing that's out there, because the attacks evolve overnight and all the time. So to close this out, let me just tell you a little bit about security. Since you sat through this presentation, I do truly appreciate it. We were founded in 2010. We do everything from managed security services to penetration testing assessments to governance risk and compliance consulting. We specialize in servicing financial institutes. We've been doing it for a very, very long time. We understand you guys. We understand those needs, and we talk your language. Our goal is to safeguard your business and bring you peace of mind. So with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you for attending, any comments, and I'm sure that we'll be following up with you if you want to email them out later. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jen, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate that. And all of you guys will get a copy of this presentation in a day or two, so look out for that. But if you do have any questions, feel free to chat them in the box down at the bottom. Or if you want to unmute yourself and ask live, you're welcome to do that as well. So we'll give a couple minutes for that.
Jen, we did get one question. It says, you mentioned multi-factor authentication has been bypassed via SMS interception. What about push authentication apps like Microsoft Authenticator and Duo and such like that? Like, so they have Google Authenticator. A lot of folks have these what they call like a token. So what happens is they have this mathematical algorithm that generates these tokens, and they're able to take that authenticator and then enable it, right? So that you don't have to send the SMS, because we know that SMS can be intercepted by these applications and done there. So you're 100% right. That is the better method of doing it. Now, we have seen some certain attacks. So remember when we talked about how they've gotten into the system controls or system profile of the device itself. They can overlay and even take snapshots of that as the user's bringing it up and intercept and send it back. I have only ever seen that in some very, very targeted, very, very specific like attacks. And I haven't traditionally seen that occurring in the financial institutes area. I've seen that more in like espionage, state-like kind of stuff, where somebody's written some specific things for a specific authenticator for a specific person. I haven't personally, or we haven't as a company, seen that executed generally. It is possible, but it is extremely hard and difficult to do there. So yes, if you're going after two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, I keep saying two-factor, but it's all multi-factor now. Using something like a Microsoft Authenticator or a tokening app is a better like solution and much harder to for an attacker to circumvent or to compromise than say SMS interpretation. So hopefully that answers your question. Looks like we have a follow-on question. Says, what are your thoughts on MSSP integration with DevSecOps? So it depends on how you define what rules DevSecOps incorporates. I'd need to know a little more what exactly you mean by DevSecOps and what portion associated with that. I don't see a lot of in the financial groups doing DevSec itself, especially. I guess you're talking about development, right? Separation ops. Can you expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind, just so I know how we're addressing this? Maybe.
Hey Jeremy, yeah, this is Ben Denton. So
hey Ben.
Yeah, just looking at kind of the evolution in internal security operations and integration with development teams. How do you, as a third party, how do you get into that speed cycle with pen testing happening as part of development, or is there a model for that, or have you thought about that at all?
So in the financial institutions, that's not something that is seen very often, but more in the in some of our say government contracting, things like that, where it definitely totally makes sense, where they're doing development and they're trying to release code and go through their process and integrate with like managed services or detection and testing as they go. I don't see it as much because a lot of times financial institutes just outsource those pieces and it's not integrated with the managed services. It would be really interesting to make sure that occurs, but not so much on the managed services for that, because it's like monitor, detection, reaction kind of stuff, but more on the what you were talking about at the very beginning, which is the proactive side of things, where you have not only the quality assurance and the requirements mapping testing and things like that, but also security like testing and milestones that have to be associated with that release to be then provisioned to different levels of ability to be released, right? So you have your alpha, your beta, all those different things. That is where I would think it would be, and it wouldn't be so much managed services. You could turn that into managed services, but I think it'd be more like you were talking about with the code reviews, the technical testing, and making sure that that's associated with, just like you do functional and feature-like testings into that. We have a few of our managed services customers that do develop code and ops and stuff, and now we look at that environment a little different than we do, say, the normal regular network environment. What we're doing in there is, we classify that at a different level, and we're deploying a different types of techniques there, right? So maybe in the regular infrastructure, we may deploy, let's say, a DLP-like solution. In the coding environment and whatever repositories and stuff that they're using there, we'll definitely, in our managed services, push in additional policies such on the migration of that code and transactions occurring between, say, developer's workstation and repository server going up in the cloud to be published for testing and releases and controls and those types of things. We'll be very, very specific on that data. And then we'll use the tags and embedded content to then detect if that goes anywhere else. And we're looking more for exfiltration and distilling and theft of that, more than we're looking for the attack and modification of that code. But that's something that, especially in DevSecOps, that you have to be extremely aware of, is that if you're developing something, sometimes it's not the theft of that data that will make the attacker extremely happy or their goal, but the modification of that data. Because if they can get in and modify that, then they may be able to then infect your user base or control what your user base is. And if your user base is, financial institutes or, say, the government,